Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when and where you're listening to this. I see some people are still joining on. We'll give them another minute or so. We've got a lot to talk about on this webinar. This is our 201 class where we really get a little bit more of an advanced look at Domotz and how it works. Guess while we're waiting, and since nobody likes to watch these anymore when they've seen webinars, we'll go over this quickly. Just part of our housekeeping items. First of all, it's live. As you know, things can go wrong, but usually they don't. Feel free to ask questions with this. Take advantage of that GoToWebinar control panel, type those questions there. We've got a team standing by both on our support and sales team. And I invite Giancarlo to interrupt me at any point if a question is pertinent to what we're talking about. Otherwise, we'll get to those at the end. If you have more detailed questions, by all means, reach out to support@domotz.com as well. In today's discussion, we're going to really do a quick recap of the 101 stuff that we talked about, just for those that may not have heard that, but we're not going to go into great details there. We'll talk a little bit more about reporting and logging. We'll talk about network diagnostics and performance and how you can utilize some of those features within Domotz to either validate or check out how your system is performing. We'll look and touch on network security and how Domotz helps you with that. Of course, that could actually be a whole 301 class if we wanted, but we'll just hit the highlights on this about how you can use it quickly. And then also we'll talk about managing all of your agents. It's very easy to see how you can manage the devices within each network, as you've learned within the 101 class, but we'll take a look at our search and manage feature and see how that can help you when you're dealing with a certain type of system across all your agents. Then we get into the more advanced stuff. We'll talk about device sensors, meaning SNMP, TCP. We'll look at how to set those up. We'll look at some of the more advanced alerting capabilities, as well as some of the features within alerts, which I think a lot of people care about, such as, you know, getting a total digest of all the alerts that are happening, as well as even snoozing. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about setting up some of the external services, right? The third-party services, dealing with cloud-based systems and things like documentation services and getting those in. That's a big topic. We won't go into a great amount of detail, but at least we'll get you started and point you in the right direction for that. And like we did in the 201, we think the best way to describe this is to just get directly into a demo. So let's go ahead and do that. Bring up some of my notes of things that I do want to talk about. A few things I'll point out in this webinar, just as a high level again, and we talked a little bit about this before, but I think it's important to see this again. In the Domotz interface, there's a lot of power within these systems, and I think a couple of things you want to see is that when it comes to network monitoring and management, Domotz does an amazing job of being able to understand what's going on in a system, look at the different network configurations, see how the configuration files are set up, and then even being able to compare changes from one configuration to a file to another. This is one of the important aspects when it comes to network management, but also monitoring that network, and Domotz does a really good job of that. We touched a little bit about that in the 101. We'll see some more of that today when it comes to alerts. The other thing that I want to point out is when it comes to devices and looking at systems on the network, being able to, in fact, let's do a search here across all of our systems, but being able to look across any system that we have in our monitored agents and look at device information, right? We can pull out like this virtual machine here. We can see operating system info. We can see physical disk, logical disk. There's a lot of power within these systems to be able to see what you can look at. That'll pull up that information. But then the last thing I want to show is also on NAS drives. So if I look at, I think this system is set up here for me. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. When we look at this system and we do a search for, of course, I could have just also found this in the search window, but taking a look at things like Synology, drives, QNAP, NAS drives, but being able to see all the information through SNMP, looking at storage, seeing how things are configured. This is all a really valuable tool when it comes to seeing your agents live and understanding the status of these things. So we'll touch on some of that. Okay, let's get into the meat of this webinar and point out some of the cool things that we can do. We're going to touch first on reporting and logging. Why do we want to look at reporting and logging? Well, first of all, we think this is extremely useful when it comes to maintaining communications with your customers. You can see on the reporting and logging tile, there's a couple of key things that you can do here. First and foremost, let's go to the reports section before we talk about logging. You'll notice within the reports, you can actually have either manually generated reports or you can do automatic reports. These automatic reports get sent out at the beginning of each month based on, and it'll add the information that you want to have in it. You can add which recipients should get these reports, what are the details within Domotz that should also get these reports. So this is a really nice feature, again, to maintain that communications and that connection effectively with your customers. If you have a service level agreement in place with your customers, communications is absolutely critical. And we think that providing even a basic, branded report, this is a report that can be branded. We talked about some of that information and branding inside your account. Being able to set that up, I think this will bring up our web page. When you add your logos, when you add your details, right, this stuff is actually what shows up in those reports. So to make it convenient for you to have your customers, stay in touch with you and remember that it's you that is on top of these things and working with your customers. The other thing that I would point out within these reports are these details are selectable. All right, if you want to add information about the agent as a whole, if you want to look at which important devices are on the network, you can set that up, but also the activity log. When it comes to communications with your customers, they want to know that if they're paying for some level of service on a recurring basis, that you're doing something for them on a recurring basis. And that also gets to this logging tab. Under the logging tab, just so you guys are aware, this is really good for auditing purposes, making sure that when your team members are accessing this agent, what it is that they're accessing, all that information does get reported in this logging section. This is also what gets printed into that report as well. So whether you generate that report for yourself or your own team, or whether you come to this logging section to see what's going on and how connections are being made, this is really, really valuable. Not only does it show who made that connection, but it also shows the date and time. So if anything does go wrong in the network, you could look back at these logs and see, hey, who was the last person to touch this? What did they get into? Is there any correlation between, changes on that network and what our team or team members have done? We think this is really, really powerful there. The last thing that I want to point out in this report and logging section is actually really useful when it comes to, in some essence, security compliance, as well as just inventory management, right? Asset management. And that is the ability to export all the devices in a list. You can send a CSV file to your account that gives you all the information about each and every device that's on that network, its location, its zone. You may recall as well that I showed you when you're using the desktop application, you also can go to the import export feature in the menus. And when you're on that devices list, you can export that devices list to an Excel file. And then you can bring that up. So let's just go ahead and save this here. And then I'll bring it up on my desktop and then share it with you. So that way you can see this directly. Once this comes up, I'll pull it up to the screen. This is essentially an example. This is a very powerful Excel file in the sense that not only does it just list out all the information about each and every device, let's just for ease of use here, let's show you how we can sort and filter. So we can deselect everything. We can just look at specific things like cameras. We also can blow this up a little bit so people can see the information better. We can come in here and make changes to details within each camera. If I want to add location and zone information, if I want to put any notes about passwords, whatever it may be, that all can be stored in this Excel file, saved, and then you can actually upload that back into the system as we talked about. But from a reporting and logging perspective, a lot of times your customers or your clients may need to have a good understanding of what are all the systems that are on their networks, whether that's for security compliance reasons, whether it's for things like PCI compliance and understanding what's on the networks that are critical to credit card systems. This becomes a really useful tool for documenting all of that. So that is there. That really covers a lot of the reporting and logging aspects of what Domotz will do here. Let's talk a little bit about network diagnostics and what can be done from that perspective. First and foremost, one of the things that Domotz will do is we do LAN speed tests. So we're looking at the performance of your ISP, your internet service provider. When you click on the network performance tab, this essentially is looking at the WAN speed. This is taken from the perspective of the agent, wherever the agent is in that network. If you have that 6 levels deep on, a managed switch architecture, then keep in mind that speed test is having to traverse all of those managed switches, go out to the routers, the modems, the firewalls, whatever may be there in place, then to get out to that network. A couple things I'll point out is, first of all, the speed test happens around every 6 hours. Okay, so just approximately. You should be aware of that. If you are concerned about bandwidth or concerned about data consumption across a network, you certainly can disable these speed tests through these options. Another thing I'll point out is we have a couple different speed test methods that you can utilize. One is FAST, which is enabled through Netflix. Another one is MLab, which is really more of a university project that has testing servers scattered throughout the world. You may, depending on your locations, depending on your situation, you may want to try different speed test methods if you are concerned about that, to see the level of accuracy. Of course, I do want to point out that for both of these are actually using servers that are outside the ISP's network. So it is actually truly traversing the whole network to get to these servers. Unlike systems like speedtest.net or Ookla, which they're also known as, where a lot of times they'll have servers sitting inside the ISP. So it's really less of a point-to-point, true point-to-point connection, and more of a point-to-server type connection with respect to Ookla. So we do feel that MLab and FAST do a little bit better job of checking speeds across the actual wide area network. Several factors can degrade the performance of your speed test. As I said, depending on where the agent is located within your network, depending on traffic going in and out of the network. As you know, these speed tests are at a little bit lower priority, so they're not going to be as accurate. This particular system here is on a cable modem, so you can see the variation that happens, and a lot of that is just based on the fact that it's a shared network. So that also needs to be accounted for. We've got lots of information inside of this area about the different factors and what affects this, but you should read through this and understand that this is a great tool for validating that you're getting at least approximate speeds, but it may not be the end-all be-all true speed. One of the more important things that we see with this network performance is really the downtime aspects. So when a system goes down for an extended period of time, we're going to flag it as being down. Fortunately, this network hasn't gone down in a while. You also can do things like route analysis. So if you want to go to common services, whether it's Spotify, Facebook, Google, or you want to put in your own custom servers, you can actually do that, and you can get route traces to see how things are traversing over the network and look at the latencies of those, like you would a standard route analysis type test or an external latency test. Oh, one thing I should point out on network performance, you absolutely can set up alerts on these, whether you do it as shared alerts, which we're going to talk more about today, or you're going to do as personal alerts, knowing when the system is up or down. But more importantly, as we're talking about network performance, looking at when the WAN speed goes beyond or below a certain threshold that you care about here, right? So if you see the download threshold dropping below a certain amount that you've set, you can get alerts on that as well. Of course, you can also get alerts when the whole service goes down, right? A connection is lost to the WAN. Let's talk a little bit about internal speed tests, okay? From an internal perspective, you'll notice that every device on the network will typically see a bar here. This is really showing round trip delay performance. This may be a good example because I think this virtual machine is actually hosted over a wireless network. Under each and every device, we can essentially get a historical ping to these devices. Domotz, when we are checking the status of a device, we're effectively doing ICMP requests, right? Commonly known as pings. We are collecting that data and then we're storing that off and we're taking averages. We're looking over time how this system is behaving. Now, again, this is a wireless device, so I would expect to see some level of variability. I would also expect to see packets being dropped, as is the case here. The one thing I do want to point out here is that round trip delay is often a very good validation that a device is performing as expected, but also if you start to see an increase in the average latency over time, or if you're starting to see a lot more packets being dropped from a device, that can be an indication that something on the network may not be working as expected, or maybe a new device was introduced that all of a sudden is hogging bandwidth. You can use these details from each and every device to understand where you start to see degradation in performance as a whole. Just like with the WAN speed, the one thing that you can do is set up round trip delay alerts that says, when the average latency is increasing beyond a certain threshold, right? When that median latency goes beyond a particular threshold, I can get an alert. If I start to see an abundance of packet loss, right, based on percentage, if I see a certain percentage go above, say, 25, 30%, you can also generate alerts on that. I will say that latency in general is not a bad thing, but varying latency can affect things, especially when it comes to audio-based systems or even AV equipment, audio and video-based equipment. Usually they have, they will average in, a certain amount of buffering, but if you see latency changing over a time, it can really mess up how those buffering, how that gets affected. Mostly you see that in voice over IP systems where they really care about low latency or minimizing latency, I should say. And if that latency is changing, can cause problems. One other thing I'll say about round trip delay, which I'm not sure whether a lot of people are aware of this or not, but we've talked about how you have the ability to add external hosts to your systems. So from the agent point of view, it can actually do latency testing out to a public IP address. This can be really useful. We'll use this Republica.it system here. If you look at this, we're actually checking latency and as well as packet drops over the wide area network. So this is going all the way out to Italy here, so that's why you would expect to see such a high latency on average. But this can be a really good and useful tool for not only checking performance to a third-party server or an external server, but you can also use it to validate that your system is getting remote connectivity. Even if you go and ping, say Google DNS, for instance, I think on this particular agent here, we've got Blue Jeans as an example. I think that was what was at the top, but you can even add in, here's where we have like pretty low latency out to Blue Jeans, so that's good. But if you wanted to ping Google DNS or 1.1.1.1, you can get that type of those types of validations as well, right? Okay, let's see. We talked a little bit about, we've talked about the ISP performance testing. We've talked about the round trip delays. We've also talked about setting up alerts on those. Oh, one of the things that I always like to mention when we're talking about round trip delay, and I even showed this, right? When you're on a Wi-Fi device, you should absolutely expect to get higher latency. You should also expect to get varying latency by a fair amount compared to if you are on a wired device. Typically, when you're on wired devices, you're going to see an extremely low latency. You should, unless there is something going on in the network switch or that managed switch that is causing behavior, or if that particular port got put onto a say a lower priority for whatever reason. Those are the things you need to watch and debug from, or debug, excuse me. All right, let's talk a little bit about network security and what we mean by that. We'll go into this lab here. So when you go into a particular agent, you'll notice that we have a network security tab in the upper right corner. I want to talk a little bit about what we are doing with respect to network security. We are by no means a SOC, right? We're not a security operations center. We do view ourselves as a network operations center, but we do think it's important to give you information about what's going on in the network that could potentially affect security or be seen as a vulnerability. The first thing that I will mention is the fact of device discovery. Anytime we discover a new device on the network, we are going to provide as much information as we can about that device, when it showed up, right? What its IP address was. If we can get details about the make, model, and type, we're going to do that as well, and we're going to present that. Why is this important? Well, if you're monitoring specific types of VLANs, for instance, if you're monitoring a data LAN, or you're monitoring a security VLAN, or even an AV system, right? So if you have VLANs that are associated with audio video equipment, highly likely that you probably are not expecting new devices to show up on, say, your security camera LAN. And if one does, you should be aware of that. You may need to blacklist it. You may need to go in and validate what it is. Maybe there's a technician working on it and it's perfectly acceptable. But Domotz can give you real-time information about a device showing up, and more importantly, we can get you alerts on that as well. So if a new device does come in, we can absolutely bring in that security alert and let you know that, whether it's a push notification to your phone or a ticket being created in a PSA tool or a ticketing system. All right, we can have that. The next thing that we have is really looking at port status. So we're looking at ports being open from the cloud or the WAN side back into your network. So this would be a port that's opened at a firewall level, right? Fundamentally, these are TCP ports that are open. So if you have a particular TCP port that is open, Domotz will detect that at the front end of that firewall, and we will bring awareness to you. We'll alert you to what that port is when it was detected, okay? It is up to you at that point to either accept that that port is open or reject it. If you reject it, the assumption is that you're going into your router, your firewall, wherever you're managing your ports being open at that WAN interface, and you are either closing it, or you're making sure that the device that that port is open to, right, wherever that port is being forwarded to inside of your LAN, that you have appropriate controls in place on that device. Obviously, that would come in the form of authentication, right, username, passwords, whatever may be appropriate. So this is one method in which Domotz helps you better understand what is on your network and what is open from the outside back into the system. A lot of people will have firewalls and really sometimes even SOCs in place that are supposed to be doing this for them, but we still have a lot of service providers that will take advantage of this capability and have Domotz doing a secondary check, right, on those ports and that are maybe open on that device. The other thing that I'll say is that we look at ports being open from the inside out. Usually this is in the form of UPnP, right? Universal plug and play. I really hope as a service provider you disable UPnP for, or at least a UPnP server inside your system, because it really is a legacy technology. But we see a lot of times where that service will be enabled by default. And anytime a device gets plugged in, especially in, you know, the infamous IoT device, whatever that is, right, that gets plugged into the network, if it binds a port, a UPnP server, it can actually enable that port to be open, and you can, that device can have now access or free reign in and out of that network. So it's a little bit of a risky, I guess I would call it a vulnerability that you have on your network. We're there to bring awareness, to say, hey, there's a particular device on your network that is requesting to be exposed to the outside or create a tunnel from the outside in and out, and you should be aware of that. So we set those alerts for you there, or you can get alerts on that. Let me see, I want to point out, you know, most security processes, whether you're talking about NIST or SOC 2 compliance or ISO process, really require awareness of what's on your network, right? They also ask for changes in the network. If you remember, I talked a little bit about, you know, I showed that demonstration where we went to a particular switch. Here, let's use this particular site here, where I think we have some Cisco switches, right? You have the ability to look at changes in your configuration files, right? So awareness of what ports are on the network, awareness of like configuration file changes that are out there and how things are different, right? Those are all really, really important aspects when it comes to security processes. And we've seen this across the board, whether you're dealing with things like PCI compliance, you're dealing with SOC 2 compliance, you're dealing with NIST, right? They all require some level of knowledge around how your system is architected, what ports are open, and what devices are on these networks. Domotz makes it very easy for you to understand not only all of the assets that are out there, but also how those assets are configured. So it's a really good idea to leverage the Domotz capabilities for these types of security checks. If not being done by your SOC, at least this is a secondary check for you as well. All right. So we talked quite a bit about reports and logging. We talked about some of the security aspects there. One of the things that a lot of people wanted to understand more about Domotz is how can they easily search across all the devices or all the agents that they have, especially as you start to grow, right? As you start to scale, you start to worry about you know, what is the status of particular systems within a given client's network. Let me show at the agent level first. Under our search and manage tab on the left-hand side, you will see that you have the ability to search across all your agents. These just happen to be the list of agents that I have in my site. But if you're dealing with hundreds of agents, or you're dealing with multiple customers that have multiple agents within their networks, this list can get really large. But if you wanted to search across these customers for particular information, right? If I type the word demo, we see that these three agents here are associated with the word demo in some way, shape, or form, right? Either under their contract ID, or there may be customer information here. If I have a particular MAC address that I know I was searching for, I could look for that at the agent level. This gives me the ability to filter down into particular customers and then make changes across those systems. So if I highlight this particular system, I have the ability to now see how Domotz has this device configured, right? What shared alerts may be associated with this particular device, what alerts in general are associated with this device, and any particular information that may be relevant to how this site is configured. If I click on multiple agents, I can actually see how I can make changes to these properties across all these agents. So this becomes a really, really powerful tool for you in order to adjust properties associated at the agent level. But if I scale this back and look at each individual device, I now can search across all of my different agents that are out there. You can see all the list of agents that are out there that have the word Cisco. If I want to hone in and look at say Meraki specifically, right? I can look at Cisco, I can go down to the filters within the make and look at Meraki. I can then see some of the status if that's what I want to do. But again, more importantly, if I wanted to grab this Meraki master AP, check out its settings and properties, I can do that. If I wanted to, let's go look at Cisco, and something that I think is very common, a common use case for a lot of service providers, is if I wanted to look at this SG350 that was here, right? So standard Cisco switch that's out there. If I let's say I had this set up the way I wanted to with respect to how often I'm polling the system, you know, the SNMP sensors, right? The things that are, you know, kind of looking at the details, how much bandwidth is going across particular ports, maybe looking at the temperature of a system, right? If those are configured the way I want, I can actually use this particular page to export those device settings to my desktop or my laptop. But then what I can do, and I won't actually do the implementation, but if I wanted to push that configuration across to these other switches, I can actually go in and import that system or that setting here. It's going to give me the option to select which sensors. Here you can say I have 56 different sensors that I can push. If I have SNMP authentication that I want to push, I can do all that. If I wanted to go in and change particular settings, whether it's the name or the location of this, I could do all of that, or I can, of course, uncheck those things as well. Once I do that, I can push that configuration to all the devices across many different agents, essentially instantaneously, making it easy for you to, what I would say is template a particular system across multiple customers. In case I made changes to SNMP authentication credentials over a given site, or even if I did that across multiple sites for a particular customer, I can make that change very, very quickly here. So this is just some of the advantages of this search and manage feature, and being able to define and discover devices regardless of where they sit in your network, being able to adjust these properties very quickly, being able to do mass edits across devices and or agents is where the power of this search and manage capability comes in. Okay, good stuff. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the more advanced details of Domotz. One of the things that service providers really started using Domotz for was accessing deeper information about devices. Simple Network Management Protocol is one of the ways in which you can interrogate devices and get a lot of data about these devices. As long as the devices have either OIDs or MIBs, right, SNMP associated with that, you can start to interrogate these devices in a very easy and simple way through Domotz. So one example is printers. This is just easy to talk about because everybody understands what a printer is, as well as most of the time Simple Network Management Protocol is associated with these devices. A couple things I'll point out. When it comes to NAS drives, when it comes to printers, when it comes to power distribution units, or more importantly, UPSs, all right, we have a standard set of templates that when we discover devices that have can be enabled with these templates, we will allow you to add these pre-configured sensors to that. Now I've already added those, and that's why you happen to see things like the black cartridge, right, cyan, magenta, essentially the toner levels. And we provide this in a, I guess I would call it a human readable form, right, telling you that there's 53% or 64% left of the magenta cartridge on this particular printer. You, of course, can come in and add specific OIDs to this as well, right? Some can naturally be discovered, or if you happen to know that you have a particular sensor that you care about, you can add that manually, right? So you can come in here, type the sensor. If you know the OID, which essentially is this long multi-decimal pointed variable, you can add this in here and set it to what you want. If you want to get more information about particular tables, we try to provide as much information about these either tables or sensors as well. This is all information that's being pulled from the MIBs that we have in our database for this particular device. So it's very easy for you to come in and add this information across any device. A couple things I'll point out about SNMP. We have thousands and thousands of MIBs that we've aggregated and put into our database. So when we discover a device, we have a very, very high likelihood of finding that MIB that is associated with that particular device, which then makes it easy for you to, use kind of human readable or human language to actually find and discover those OIDs that are associated with that device within that MIB. Okay. If there is a particular device where you have either a custom MIB or we don't happen to have that MIB from the manufacturer in our database, I encourage you to email us, right? Create a support ticket by going to support@domotz.com. Send us the MIB or a link to that MIB, and we'll get that thing entered into our database. So that way, when we discover that device, that MIB will be readily available for you and the OIDs associated with it. Let me make sure I touched on this. One example of where you can find or where MIBs are really powerful, obviously ink levels and printers. When it comes to CPUs or PCs and servers, a lot of times you can use MIBs to look at percent utilization of the CPU, hard disk drive utilization. When it comes to some switches, like Cisco in particular, you can look at temperature of these switches through SNMP. If you have network-based temperature sensors, you can often look at temperature and humidity. Often I look at, I don't know if it's on this particular network, but if we were to set up this temperature sensor here, you can usually see, temperature and humidity. The other thing I should point out is that Domotz will graph and aggregate these sensors. Okay, we'll look at this data over time, so you can see a history of this over the last 30 days, and you can see what's going on. And of course, right, you should expect this, but being able to go in and set alerts on these SNMP sensors as well is extremely powerful. So you can come in and add that capability too. Let's talk a little bit about TCP sensors. So why are TCP sensors? We'll just use this device that's here. What is TCP and why would we use this? So the protocol here for standard transmissions over a network, right, often comes in the form of things like HTTP, SSH, Telnet, could be RDP. There could be random ports that have services that are available over standard protocols, right, that you can then query. The idea behind this is, how can I look at a particular device, and if I expect a certain service to be running over this transmission control protocol, can I see that that service is up and running? Common examples would be, like on this one, we have a web page associated with this. In fact, you'll notice that Domotz discovered both port 80 as well as port 443 being available as a service on this device. Essentially, if I were to look at the, in this case, I set up port 80, right? If this were to go away for whatever reason, right? If that service went down, we can generate an alert on that. Another example where TCP services often are monitored. If you have a server or you have a device on your network that is running RDP, right, remote desktop protocol, that is using also standard transmission control protocol, and you can see that port, say 3389 in the case of Windows RDP, is up and running or not. If you want to look at command line interfaces, right, for a managed switch or for, again, a virtual machine, you can do that as well. And if those services go away, you can set an alert on that. Very, very powerful tool, because not only are we looking to see that the device just responds to standard pings, right? We're looking for that online offline status. We're also doing some deeper interrogation through layer 2 as we do with ARP requests on a regular basis. But if you need to make sure that the processor itself is handling these various protocols or these different services, you can interrogate those through this TCP setup. It just gives you more advanced way of looking to make sure that the system is actually up and running as you would expect. Okay. One other thing that I'll say about interrogating devices, let's go see if we can see this. I'll go back to searching for these virtualized machines. Yeah, ESXi. Got to get rid of all of our filters. There's definitely no ESXi's that have a model of SG350. So I think if I pull up this machine, I think we have some information running about this device that we'll see. Oh, sure, it happens to be password protected. Let's go back to that other one. And let's see if it will bring up the information associated with this particular device. So right now it's trying to interrogate this system, and I'm not sure if this system is actually up and running or not, but essentially what Domotz will do is we will interrogate different types of services, whether it's WinRM or in the case of Linux-based machines, we're going to see that there are certain details within Linux, such as version numbers, patch information, the server architecture itself will show up on these different types of devices. If I knew exactly which agent this system was on, I might be able to give you more details about it, but I am not going to get that, I don't think. The beauty of the understanding more about what is on the operating system is that it really helps you understand patch management, and let's see if it will show it on this system here. I may have something configured wrong. I'm on I often am on a development platform here, so I may have messed something up, which is why I'm not seeing that information. But I'm sure Giancarlo will tell me how to fix it later on. Anyway, seeing this type of patch information, being able to report on that helps you better understand that all of your systems are up to date and working as expected. So, last thing I'll say is, yeah, any of these details that we have, especially when it comes to these sensors that are out there, whether you're looking at SNMP or TCP, right, we have the ability to set alerts on them. And in the case of SNMP, if you have variables that you want to track over time, you even have the ability to do that, like I showed with this particular thermostat, right? Even looking at things like dew point, right? Whatever it may be, right? How is humidity changing in systems, right? You can look at that and you can alert over time. Let's talk a little bit about advanced alerting. So configuring shared alerts. This is something that a lot of people want to be able to do. Understanding how our alerts are set up is a really important aspect here. When it comes to, let's talk about shared alerts first. I'll actually follow my notes. A few things I'll say about shared alerts. They're called shared alerts because you can have one or more what we call a contact channel enabled for any type of event that gets triggered inside your network. Examples of contact channels: PSA tools, okay, ticketing systems, messaging systems, right? Slack, Microsoft Teams, even Telegram. The ability to just send a general alert out is another type of email or a type of channel that you can have, whether it's, you know, support@domotz.com or support at my company, whatever it may be. You can set up alerts to those general emails. You also have the ability, and we've done webinars on this, but to be able to trigger webhooks, right? To push notifications to external cloud services that can then, you know, take action based on the information that you provide. These are all the different types of channels that you can enable. So you can get from very specific PSA tools and ticketing systems all the way into more abstract cloud-based services where you can then, configure and automate types of actions. You can put one or more of these systems in there. In fact, if we look at this one in particular, we've associated not only Microsoft Teams to get a message right across the channel, but we also have Autotask opening up a ticket. One of the things that you need to be aware of is while you can set up those channels, you also need to then, when you start an alert, you need to say which events within an agent or within the network or a device can trigger those shared alerts. So in this particular case, we've set it up so that if a device goes up or down, or if a configuration changes on a managed switch or firewall, we can get an alert. There are network events, right? Holistic network events, such as the agent going offline, a new device being discovered, right? Even things like new features being discovered within the system, we can actually generate these events that can then cause a particular shared alert to go off. Of course, you need to think about naming conventions of these alerts. You can color code them so that way your whatever system you're looking at, you can have easy visibility into. But these are the things that you set up. Of course, once you save these systems and update it, right, you then need to apply these shared alerts to your devices. The way in which you can do that, just from your account point of view, right, you can either go into a specific device or you can go into the alert settings itself, okay? And as you'll open it up under network first and shared alerts, you then can go add one of those shared alerts that you created. And again, I'll point out, you can have multiple shared alerts. So if you have a shared alert that you've created that maybe is for important customers, right? You can have that type of shared alert. If you have another alert that's just specific to security events, right? You can set up alerts for that and you can apply those. It's not, you can easily see, which channels, which contact channels these events are associated to based off of the color coding that happens within these. Okay? If you want to go into specific devices, right? Here's an example where this BlueJean server at the top has multiple shared alerts associated with it, and you can add more as appropriate, right? So my MacBook here has a Teams and Datto shared alert. So it's very easy to see as well as apply shared alerts to devices in this manner. The other thing that I will say about this is that you do have the ability to easily then disable alerts as well. So if you need to remove, you saw it before, if you wanted to remove an alert from a particular system, you can do that. Let's talk about personal alerts a little bit and what you can do. So personal alerts are associated with the account that you're logged in at. I'm using my jbfowler@gmail.com alert here just to do this demonstration. I can essentially disable alerts to this account, right? It's going to stop all of the email and push notifications that I've set up. This is a very broad way of disabling alerts to that particular account. Another thing that I have the ability to do while we're talking about disabling alerts here, you see that it's enabled, by the way. But if I go into a particular agent, let's say I'm working on this IoT lab and I do not want to get alerts only for this particular agent, right? One of the things I can do is go into the alert settings here, and you'll see that I can also disable it at this level. So this is going to disable this particular agent. Now, one of the cool things that I can do is I can either disable it until I re-enable it, or I can just snooze it. So if I know that I'm going to only be working on this particular agent for the next 4 hours, I can simply come in here and say, okay, disable any alerts that happen over the next 4 hours. And in 4 hours from now, these alerts will come back on. You can see that things are disabled for this particular account at this point, right? So I want you to know about snoozing alerts, because we do see a lot of people that want to be able to do this, and it's a good alternative. this allows you to, the Domotz agent to continue to aggregate data, look at systems. But if you know a particular device, an important device on that network is going to be offline because you are working on it, just snoozing it so you're not getting new tickets open, just so you're not getting these personal alerts coming to you, is a very, very good idea. Another thing that I want to point out here is under personal alerts, you'll notice that there is this daily digest. So in general, Domotz is going to send you alerts to your email, right, that you've configured if you've set it up for email and push notifications, okay? But you can come in here and make it so that your particular account can get a consolidated list of emails. If you set it up for one time per day, essentially what that means is at 8:30 a.m. as it's configured here, you can set the time as specific to your needs, right? You can get an aggregated list over a 24-hour period of all of the alerts that have happened in the accounts that you are managing. Very useful if you are a manager and you don't want to be getting those active alerts, but you want to be able to look in a spreadsheet to see exactly what has been triggered. You also can set time windows. So if you're doing shift work, okay, so if you're working during the normal hours of 8:30 to 5:30 p.m., right, you can set it up so that you do not get alerts then, but between the hours, but at nighttime, you can set it so that you do get a list of what alerts happen over the evening. Then you can take action on those from a single email, right, with that list versus trying to look through, maybe tens or hundreds of emails that you got from the system itself. So I bring this up just so you guys are aware of that. Okay, so take advantage of some of these tools. These are out here to help you be more efficient, but we wanted to make sure that you're aware of these so that way you knew you could go look for those. All right, last thing I want to talk about, setting up external services. You'll notice on the left-hand menu of Domotz, you have the services and drivers section. Any services that you have put into your system, you will see available to you, whether they are configured as contact channels like I have with Autotask or ConnectWise Manage or even Teams and Slack, or if you have documentation services, right? Here I have dtools configured. If you are using a third-party documentation tool such as IT Glue, Hoodoo, right, even LineGuard, right, by all means, you can go in and configure these things. These integrations that we've done are really powerful. Whether Domotz has done them or whether the third party has done the integration, the beauty of it is taking all of the assets that Domotz discovers on these networks and bring them into these systems, making it easy for you to be more efficient and in the certain cases like Cloud Radio, right, getting better documentation out to your clients. If you've integrated ticketing systems, right, you can do that as well, or we've talked about messaging systems too. But in some sense, I want to make sure you guys are aware too that when it comes to, I'd call it reporting tools, right, productivity tools, right, being able to take data from the Domotz system and import that into Excel, import that into Power BI, right, taking advantage of our APIs and importing those into cloud-based services like Node-RED or Zapier. Those things are available to you. The key thing to be aware of is that with any of these that are here, clicking on these carrots, clicking on these arrows are either going to take you to the third-party page to show you how to do the configuration, or it's going to take you to our pages to help you with that configuration. Another example of where we have integrations, but they're not shown on this page, happens to be within devices themselves. I think it's this site is a good example. So when we discover a device that's on the network that has external services associated with it, you'll notice that in the the right-hand side of the devices menu, there is this devices external service page that can be set up. This allows you to connect the system that we've discovered and look at its cloud-based system to integrate that information from that cloud system into the Domotz UI. Here you see Cisco Meraki. We've discovered a Meraki device. Of course, they have a cloud-based service. Now, on my account, I don't have their APIs for this, so I'm not going to enter this here. But when we do this integration, right, when we import their API key and the organization name, we're going to pull the details from those wireless access points of that managed switch into the Domotz UI, just enriching that data further. We do the same thing with Ubiquity. We can do the same thing with firewalls as well as appropriate. So be aware that there's two different places that you can add third-party services. One is if you're looking for a particular device, go to that device's page. But if you're looking to integrate with external services like documentation tools, make sure you check out that left-hand menu on the services and drivers page, okay? Not going to talk about it today. This is really for like a 401 class, but I will do a shout out that we do have a webinar on Thursday where we're going to be introducing and giving examples about this custom drivers, which again is a place where you can take and add more information. Think about it as third-party information through devices that are out there and bring those into the Domotz UI in that setup. Okay. Last thing I want to say before we get to some questions, I'm sure that Giancarlo probably consolidated a few questions for us. I didn't say it today, but I certainly talked about it in the 101. Help.domotz.com is absolutely a great resource for you to get a better understanding of what's going on in the system. You'll notice that on many of our pages, there's always these question marks, right? There's this upper right-hand corner book that will take you to our these resources. Please utilize those. I also want to say that when it comes to that services and drivers page, you have third parties in the integration where you can go and get information about their systems. You also should take advantage of our YouTube channel, right, and our webinar pages. So we often do a little bit more detailed discussions on different devices, different services. But if you go to even if you just go to domotz.com, right, you will see under our resources page that we have webinars, knowledge base, information about Domotz security. So all of that is out there for you. Lastly, support@domotz.com is absolutely where you can go to get more information from our team, and we are more than happy to answer any questions you have there as well. All that being said, Giancarlo, where do we stand from a questions perspective, and what can we talk about here?
Hi, GB. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Very, very nice presentation covering most of the advanced, or at least the 201 level of functionality. One thing that has been asked also, you covered with the introduction of the custom driver, something that we are going to present in 2 days on Thursday. Basically, we'll give the ability to every single of Domotz user to interact with their own devices and extract information from those devices in the way they like and in the way they know how to extract. Now, there has been a few questions on something that we are going to develop soon. So I would like to start from those questions. In particular, Matthew and a few other has question about the list of devices. Now, when you go inside one Domotz agent and you have all the list of devices, those information are pretty somehow listed in the way Domotz like. Somebody wants to customize this view, and now the straight answer was that this view cannot be customized in the terms of columns that you see there. But there are a few things that I want to mention. We very recently, between November and December, we added what we call the monitoring dashboard, which is an area where you can create your own table. You can bring the fields that you really like to have in those lists, in those tables, and the device that you care. And the device can be cross-agent, so cross-sites. You can aggregate, for instance, all the Cisco switches, SG250 from across all the agents and sites that you have, because you want to, for instance, review the firmware version that they have. And this is the first thing I want to mention. The second one is we as a development team are spending a lot of resources in these days to optimize the view behind the search and manage. So when you click on search and manage now, you have a possibility to view all the devices across the agents. You can search from them, and you can see a few fields there. We are going to enrich this view. We are going to add fields and fields and fields and probably tabs there. We're going to do the same at the agent level. So for every single agent, we will list more information, which will give you basically a direct information and direct access to what you really care. No, the data is important, and you need to access the data straight away, very, very quickly. Now, still speaking about data, the other question, which also brings me to something that we are developing, is related to the asset management part. JB has correctly showed you how Domotz integrates with platforms like IT Glue, like IT Portal, Hoodoo, Cloud Radial, and this is all of these are basically documentation system where Domotz is the real-time provider of the data, and those systems just aggregate data from multiple platforms, and Domotz is one of those platforms. Now, there is a similar concept in some of the PSA platform and ITSM tools, where you basically need that platform to take care of all the tickets, but also take care of all the activities that you manage for your customers. So from that point of view, you also use those platforms to sort of document all the devices. So when we talk about Synchro, PSA, for instance, Fresh Service, Fresh Desk, all these platforms have their own light way of documenting devices. And at the moment, these are not synchronized with the Domotz data. So something that we are developing these days is a way to integrate, or pushing data out of Domotz into this platform as well. We'll start with Synchro, we will continue with Fresh Service, Datto, ConnectWise, and those platforms there. Basically, this is, it covers actually our 1 hour time. So there has been a few other questions, but I see the team has answered all of them already.
And Giancarlo, you bring up a really good point about the monitoring dashboards, and I think I need to incorporate that more into this 201 class, because we are seeing, now that we've built this capability, we're seeing more and more people finding ways to use this in a way that makes them more efficient. And I'm excited by it, because it's actually a very, very powerful tool in the way you can configure this and showing the devices that you care about across all your agents, right? So it takes advantage of that multi-tenant aspect of Domotz and allows you to see these different devices. So I'll make that change in the next 201 class. So good. Well, thank you very much for attending. We're a little bit over time, but I appreciate everybody joining us. Again, if we didn't get your questions answered, if you saw something that you want to know more about, or if you have, if you saw something where you think, hey, if we had this extra feature, it'd be really, really cool, reach out to support@domotz.com and we'll get back to you ASAP on that. Thank you very much, Giancarlo. Thanks for chiming in, and I want to thank the team for also answering all the questions on the back end. So thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.